Chapter 19. Teal's wings scraped against rock as he shot through what felt like a cramped tunnel. Unable to see in the pitch black, he bumped over fists of stone that tore at his skin and feathers. He tried to slow himself down, but his hands and feet slipped uselessly against the slimy sides. It was officially the worst slide he'd ever been on. There was a flash of light at the end of the tunnel before Teal was unceremoniously spit out onto a metal grate. He groaned, cold metal biting into his cheek and the taste of blood on his tongue. The heavy stones in his bag dug into his chest. With a great deal of effort, Teal pushed himself up onto his feet and looked around. Water droplets rained down on him from twisted roots dangling from the ceiling. The tang of mildew and algae hung in the air. There were multiple tunnel offshoots on the knobby rock walls behind him, spilling streams through the grated floor and into the murky water below. The gaps in the iron were about the size of his fist. Not big enough for his foot to fall through, but definitely big enough to trip on if he wasn't careful. Damn it, Teal cursed. Getting separated from his friends was the last thing he needed. Where the hell was he? Small shafts of light cut through cracks in the stone, which was a relief. Sunlight meant he wasn't below ground. Hopefully, he could still get to the top of the temple to deposit his stones, but time was ticking away. He needed a way out. Teal turned and found himself face to face with another cache. 3 stone chests sat in the middle of the room in a line, their lids open and revealing the stones inside. The obsidian stone sat on his left, the jades in the center, and a single gold stone was laid in the chest to his right. And, most importantly, a set of stairs waited on the other side. Teal's heart leapt. He wasn't totally screwed. He could grab some stones and use the stairs to escape. But, of course, he had to get through whatever obstacle was awaiting him. The smart move was to try to get the obsidian stones first, since they were easier. Teal slowly crept across the grates, eyes sweeping back and forth for any sign of danger. Ripples dragged through the water below, but when Teal stopped, so did they. It was agonizing work, moving close to the chest when he knew there was something lurking down below, but he didn't know what. By the time he reached the chest, his stomach was so queasy with nerves, he was ready to barf. The anticipation was worse than anything that could be waiting for him in the murky depths. Gathering any last ounces of bravery he had, Teal reached out and touched one of the black stones. Still, nothing happened. Slowly and ever so carefully, he started to pick up the stones and place them into his bag, trying to make as little noise as possible. But as he did, the water beneath them started to churn. Teal stuffed them into his bag faster. The 7th stone was in his hand when Teal's feet got stuck on something. He looked down. Through the iron grates, two pale green tentacles had hooked themselves around his ankles. Teal let out a strangled shout. He tried to back away, but they only tightened their grip, sending him crashing back onto his wings. Frantically, he tried to pry his ankle free, but then another tentacle grabbed his wrist and tugged hard, pulling him down onto his back once again. He tried to rip the tentacle off with his free hand, but it wouldn't budge. They tightened, making his hand and feet tingle as they cut off his circulation. In an act of desperation, Teal leaned over and bit down on the tentacle as hard as he could. They released him and retreated back to the water as something let out a blood-curdling scream. Teal had no intention of finding out what exactly that something was. Ignoring the rank taste in his mouth, he scrambled to his feet and lunged for the chest. Wrenching open his bag, he dumped the last 3 obsidian stones inside before a tentacle shot out from his ankle again. This time, he stomped down on it as hard as he could. The creature cried out again. The arm flashed from pale green to angry red, which was probably a bad sign. Teal jumped into the air, his wings lifting him up in an attempt to make a break for the stairs, but another tentacle shot out through the grates. It snatched his ankle and slammed him back down the grate with a loud clang. Teal cried out as pain exploded in his wings. Quickly, he rolled onto his stomach and tried crawling for the stairs. Before he could make it to safety, another tentacle arm snaked around his thigh. It constricted and pulled, trying to drag him back. Teal shoved his fingers between the grates and held on tight. The iron bit painfully into his skin. He was losing his grip. If he didn't think fast, well, Teal didn't want to think about what fate awaited him. Hanging on for dear life, Teal was out of options. There were no tools for him to fight back with, except for the empty chest. Frantically, his brain tried to piece together a plan. What it came up with was objectively terrible. A truly shitty plan that could go wrong at least half a dozen times, but it was all he had. His fingers were slipping. He was out of time. After saying a silent prayer to his mom, Teal let go. He rolled into his back as the tentacle pulled him, dragging his wings painfully against the grates. Teal threw himself to the side as he passed the now empty stone chest, grabbing it in his hands. With all the strength he had left, he heaved the chest over his head and slammed it down on the tentacle just below its grip on his thigh. The creature screamed, its rubbery skin flashing white. There was a flash of moldy blue blood before the tentacle retreated back into the water. Finally freed, Teal ran for it. He threw himself under the steps and turned around, ready to fight off more tentacle arms. Instead, the arms retreated, slipping back through the grates and disappearing into the water below. Holy shit! Holy fuck! Teal panted, his pulse roaring in his ears. He made sure his bag was still strapped to front, with the obsidian stone safely inside before checking he still had all 6 limbs. Other than some scrapes and suction cup-looking welts on his wrist, he was fully intact. Tio collapsed onto the steps and tried to catch his breath. If it was this difficult to just get to the lower point obsidian stones, he couldn't imagine what terrors awaited anyone who tried for the jade or gold stones. As if on cue, a shout echoed from across the room. Someone flew out from one of the tunnel offshoots, landing in a heap. Tio immediately recognized them as Ocello. Dazed, Ocello pushed himself up into a seated position. They shook their buzzed head roughly, like they were trying to rattle their brain back in place. Ocello looked around the room. When their jaguar-like eyes landed on the undisturbed gold stone waiting in its chest, their smile was all teeth. But then they spotted Tio, and their smile immediately twisted into a sneer. Ocello got up and stomped off toward the golden stone, the grates rattling loudly under their feet. "Watch out!" Tio attempted to warn. "There's—" "Shut up!" Ocello startled without even looking in his direction. A second later, a fiery red tentacle as thick as Tio's chest burst out of the water, sending a section of grape flying through the air. "I tried to warn you!" Tio called out as the arm snatched Ocello up and threw him to the ground. The tentacle dove for Ocello. Tio winced, expecting to see the semidiose get ripped apart. Instead, and absolutely the wildest shit Tio had ever seen, Ocello caught the slimy tentacle. They squeezed their thick arms around it like they were putting it in a chokehold. It thrashed wildly, slamming Ocello against the grates, but Ocello held tight, biceps bulging. The tentacle flashed between scarlet red and frightened white. "For soul's sake," Tio murmured to himself as Ocello straight up wrestled the monstrous creature. They managed to shift their grip, strangling the tentacle with one arm while they punched it mercilessly with the other. Ocello was an asshole, but damn they were strong. "Well, I can see you have your hands full," Tio said, getting to his feet. "Good luck." Tio ran up the steps as quickly as his battered body could manage. As he ascended several flights, Tio checked his watch. They were nearly halfway through the trial already. If he had any chance of getting ranked first, he'd need to speed run any other caches he came upon. Once he thought he'd gone high enough to be near the top of the temple, Tio veered off down a hallway in search of another cache. A strange, rhythmic swishing sound caught his attention. When he followed it, he found a huge, cavernous room. From where he stood at the entrance of the room, 3 paths branched out in different directions. Thick logs swung back and forth across the paths from the ceiling like pendulums. Huge curved blades made of polished obsidian tipped the ends of the logs. Instead of being grouped all together in one place, Tio saw that 10 obsidian stones were placed at different intervals between the swinging blades. This time, Tio wasn't the first one to find the cache. The goldstone must have already been taken because he didn't see it at the end of the path, but to be fair, the dozens of quickly slicing blades made it difficult to see. In the middle path, 2 competitors were battling it out for the jade stones. Marino and Xochi danced up between the blades, trying to snatch the last one at the very back of the room. It was dizzying to watch as they tried to knock each other off balance, Xochi slinging her vines like whips and Marino sending jets of water back into her face. Wasting no time, Tio rushed to grab the obsidians before they noticed he was there. He bounced on the balls of his feet, trying to get the rhythm, like he was back in grade school playing jump rope at recess. He took some time to figure out the timing of the blades, but once he got it, it was almost easy to leap between them, scooping up the small stones on his way. He reached the last one at the same time Marino and Xochi made it to the final jade. Just a hair faster than Xochi, Marino swiped the stone right out from under her. Xochi let out an angry noise as Marino bolted back to the exit. In a show of extreme skill, Xochi threw out her vines. Like grasping fingers, they snatched Marino's backpack right off her shoulders and into her waiting hands. "Ha!" she said sharply before ripping the bag open and plunging her hand inside. Smirk didn't fall from Marino's face as he kept running, making Tio pause at a safe space between blades. From the depths of Marino's bag, Xochi pulled out plain, dusty rocks. She stopped in a breath, her eyes flying wide open as she looked at Marino. As he hopped between the blades, Marino pulled open a zipper of the pouch on the front of his jacket. He reached in and pulled out 2 jade stones, flashing a wide smile. By the shape of the pocket, Tio could tell more were inside. Marino, the clever bastard, must have filled up his bag with decoy rocks from the ruins and hidden the real ones in his pockets. Xochi fumed. No, more than fumed. Her eyes grew dark, an angry snarl contorting her features. Marino stopped smiling. A shout leapt in Tio's throat to tell him to run, but Xochi was too quick. She thrust out her hands and vines shot forward, but they weren't the slick, bright green ones she usually conjured. These were a deep bluish green, thick and twisted. Marino tried to dodge them, but it was no use. They snatched him up and threw him to the floor. The slap of his body, sweat against wet stone, made Tio wince. Xochi curled her fingers and the vines thickened and twisted around Marino's torso, pinning her arms to his sides. "Xochi, knock it off!" Marino shouted, the whites of his eyes circling his pupils. Xochi didn't listen. She closed her hands into fists and the vines tightened and squeezed around his chest. Frantic now, Marino thrashed, his legs kicking wildly. "Stop!" his shrill shout echoed. Tio was rooted to the spot in shock. Xochi, while competitive, had never shown a violent streak during the trials. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. Dark shadows hollowed Xochi's eyes. Violent red thorns sprouted from the vines, cutting into Marino and drawing golden blood against his dark skin. Marino screamed, a sound so terrible and frightened that it snapped Tio into action. Without thinking, he raced forward and launched himself into the air, straight for Xochi. Her entire focus was on Marino, allowing Tio to slam into her and knock her off her feet. They both went sprawling. Pain dragged across Tio's palms as he hit the ground, but the important part was that he'd broken Xochi's concentration. The vines released Marino, who scrambled back as they withered and fell uselessly to the floor. Tio got on his feet and backed up, trying to put as much distance between himself and Xochi as he could. He expected to be the new focus of her anger, but when she sat up, instead of seething with rage, Xochi looked horrified. She looked at Tio, brown eyes wide with shock, before turning to where Marino gasped for breath. She saw the vines, the pinpricks of golden blood on Marino's skin. Xochi looked down at her hands, jerking back like she was afraid of them. "Marino! I'm so sorry! I didn't—" Marino wasn't waiting for an explanation, and neither was Tio. Both boys ran for it. "Are you okay?" Tio panted as he struggled to keep up with Marino. "I think so," Marino said, though he still looked in shock. He cut Tio a glance. "You saved my ass back there. I owe you one." "Yeah, well, just returning the favor," Tio said. "But if you want to repay me with stones—" Marino grinned. "I don't owe you that much." Tio let out a breathless laugh. "Worth a shot." Marino thumped him on the back. "See the finish." With that, the corridor branched off in two separate directions, and they split ways. Tio was more careful to check corners this time. Shit was getting dangerous. He didn't know why. Maybe it was all the pressure and stress of the competition, but people were getting more and more brutal as the trials went on. He didn't want to think about what might have happened to Marino if he hadn't interfered. He needed to finish the trial made up with Mia and Zio. Tio looped around and ran up the stairs once again. He'd gone up a few flights when he rounded a corner and caught a glimpse of someone dashing through a doorway. In a split-second decision, Tio veered off to follow them. In the dark halls, Tio barely saw them duck through a doorway up ahead. He threw himself forward, running as fast as he could. If they found a cache, Tio wanted in on it. Following them through another doorway, Tio skidded to a stop. This room was tall and narrow, almost like he was standing on the bottom of a square well. It was a tight fit, but maybe 3 feet of space from one side to the other. Ropey roots lined the curved walls, dangling through the hole at the top where daylight streamed in. Through it, he could see a blue sky dotted with fluffy clouds. A few feet in front of him stood Desi. With his back to Tio, Desi didn't notice him enter. His head was creamed back as he inspected the walls. Tio followed his gaze and saw that there were 3 small ledges. The 10 obsidian stones sat at eye level, the 4 jades were halfway up, and the single gold stone was a few feet from the opening in the ceiling. Desi turned slowly in a full circle, his bag hanging from his wrist. Tio saw the intense look of concentration on the other boy's face a split second before Desi's eyes landed on him. Startled, Desi jumped, which made Tio jump, which in turn made Desi clutch his bag protectively to his chest. Without a moment's hesitation, Desi sprang into action. As if he were a character in a video game, Desi scaled the wall, pulling himself up by the hanging roots before springing back and forth from side to side. Tio gaped. What the hell were they feeding gold to the academy? To be honest, Tio wasn't even mad about it. Just impressed. With the ease of a cat, Desi made it to the second ledge where the jade stones waited. Anchoring himself on footholds Tio couldn't even see, Desi smiled triumphantly as he reached for a stone, but his triumph was short-lived. As soon as Desi picked up the jade stone, the wall shook violently. Behind him, a slab of stone dropped, cutting off the exit. Tio stumbled while Desi latched onto the roots, swinging side to side. At first, Tio thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, but no. The walls had slowly started to close in. "Watch out!" Tio shouted uselessly to Desi. Regardless, Desi swiped the rest of the stones into his bag before bounding up the walls again. Tio suddenly realized he was the one who needed to watch out. The walls were slowly closing in, and if he didn't move fast, he'd be crushed too. As the first trial had proven, he was a shitty climber and definitely had none of the skills to scale vertical walls. Cold, desperate panic cracked through Tio's head. As if on instinct, his wings shot out. Maybe he couldn't climb, but he could fly. Tio dashed forward and dumped the obsidian stones into his bag with fumbling hands. He looked up. Desi stared down at him from the opening of the shaft. With the gold stone in one hand, he frantically waved at Tio to hurry with the other. Hoping against hope that this would work, he used all the strength in his legs to launch himself into the air and flapped his wings twice in quick succession. Tio shot upward. Hopped up on adrenaline and perilously clumsily, Tio bumped into the walls as he ascended as quickly as he could. The walls continued to close in. Stones scraped against his wings. He was so close to the top. He was nearly there. Tio stretched his hand up as far as he could. There were only a few more feet left before he'd make it clear. He just needed one more flap of his wings. There wasn't enough room. His wings jammed against the rough walls. Tio lost his momentum. For a second, he hovered in midair, just a split second before he plummeted down and inevitably be crushed to death. His stomach dropped out from under him. Teo squeezed his eyes shut, anticipating his hopefully quick death. But a hand caught his forearm. With a tug so strong and nearly pulled his shoulder from its socket, Teo was yanked to the opening. He tumbled head over feet before landing in a heap of tangled limbs with someone else. A few feet away, the shaft closed with a dull thud. Teo rolled over, gulping down air. Holy shit, holy fuck. Cheers roared to life. Miraculously, they made it to the top of the temple. Desi was sprawled out on his side in a similar state. His handsome face was ashen as he stared back at Teo, looking just as terrified as he felt. Desi! Marino was at his side immediately, pulling his friend up to his feet. Are you okay? He demanded, frantically signing with one hand. Desi nodded, albeit a little dazedly. He turned to Teo, jerking his chin up with his eyebrows pinched in question. Teo nodded and flashed an exhausted thumbs up from the floor. I'm okay, he said. When he got to his feet, the crowd roared to life again. Teo turned to the sea of jade. The Jumbotron zoomed in on him as he smiled and waved. I think it's in syllables. Pajarito, Pajarito. It was like a shot of pure adrenaline to his heart. Marino must have reached the top at the same time as Teo and Desi. Otzi had already made it to the finish and stood behind the undulating barrier. Next to her, a large gold bowl sat in the center of a raised dais. Desi approached and dumped out the contents of his bag inside. A few jade stones and one gold sprawled down along the rim before disappearing through a hole at the bottom, locking in his points. Marino followed him through the barrier and did the same. By some miracle, Teo had made it to the top of the temple without getting killed and even with time to spare. Ready to hand over the obsidian stones he collected, Teo removed his bag. But as he approached the barrier to cross the finish, he overheard Marino say, Did either of you find the soul stone? Desi shook his head no, but Otzi nodded. It's on the floor below us, she said and signed, nodding toward the main outer steps. But it's impossible to get, Otzi added. It's hanging over this huge pit. I gave up, immediately, but the twins were still trying to figure it out when I left. Aurelio and Aristella. Teo checked his watch. There were 15 minutes left behind before the trials was over. Pajarito, Pajarito. There was no way he was going to come in first with only the obsidian stones he gathered. There was still time left. Nia and Zio hadn't even made it to the top yet. Pajarito, Pajarito. He could get the soul stone. He could get it and win. Pajarito, Pajarito. Okay. Teo turned and sprinted down the steps. Chapter 20. There was only one entrance into the temple on the level below. Through it, a single corridor led to the chamber where the replica soul stone was held. At first, Teo was suspicious of how easy it was to find, but then he saw why. It was a large, dome-shaped room with a huge pit in the middle of the floor. From the ledge he stood on, Teo couldn't see how deep it went, but the groaning wind that tickled his face suggested it dropped to the very bottom of the temple. It must have been 100 feet wide, possible to jump even for a gold semidillos. Overhead, a large hand carved out of obsidian reached down from the darkness of the ceiling, its palm upturned. It did not be fingers and sharp nails. The ceiling undulated in deep shades of celestial indigo and midnight blue. Pinpricks of stars blinked in familiar constellations. Shining with golden, glimmering light, the replica soulstone waited in the palm of the cupped hand. It was seemingly impossible to get to. Teo understood why the others had given up. That was, except for Aurelio and Aristella. Across the pit was the only other exit and a ledge identical to Teo's. On it stood Aurelio and Aristella. Their heavy-looking bags sagged on their backs as they stared up at the soulstone. Aristella pointed up, explaining something to her brother while Aurelio nodded along, dark eyebrows bunched. When Aristella spotted Teo, anger flashed behind her flinty eyes. Following his sister's gaze, Aurelio's eyes lighted on Teo from across the room. His lips popped open with surprise. Teo smirked, warm satisfaction flooding his stomach. Finally, an obstacle where he had the advantage. Now he just needed to not fuck it up. Head held high, he inched closer to the edge, doing his best not to look down and psych himself out. He had this. He needed to fly up there and grab the soul stone, then he'd have more points than any of the other semidiosis. Teo took a deep, steadying breath before launching himself into the air. Taking off was easy. Landing was a bit more difficult, because if how the hand was curved, there wasn't a flat surface for Teo to perch on. Without an ounce of grace, Teo wrapped his arms around his wrist, but it was too wide to completely reach around. Skin damp with sweat, he lost his grip and slid down the polished obsidian into the palm. Teo's foot nudged the soulstone, and it rolled, teetering precariously on the edge, the pit yawning open far below. Teo's heart dropped. No! As the soulstone rolled over the edge, he threw himself forward, slamming his shin to the palm. Teo latched onto the soulstone, his fingers slipping across the smooth surface. Quickly, he hauled it back over the edge and hugged it against himself as he caught his breath. He was surprised how cool it was to the touch as he tugged it under his chin. Then again, it was only a replica. Up close, it was dizzying to stare at. Swirling solar flares twisted between Teo's fingers. What looked like liquid sunshine danced under the surface of the stone. If he squinted, Tio could have sworn there was something hidden inside. Tio's shadows almost made it look like someone, was staring back at him, but it must have been his reflection. Just a trick of the light. I did it! He sang in his head as a delirious laugh bubbled in his chest. Without any room left in his bag for such a large stone, Tio wrapped his arms securely around the soul stone before unfolding his wings. Careful not to look down, he glided down to the opposite ledge. He stumbled a bit, but otherwise made a smooth landing. With a huge grin on his face, Tio turned to show Aurelio. Stella! A violent force knocked into Tio, throwing him down. Bewildered, Tio looked up to find Aristella on top of him. She pinned his wings down with her knees, rendering them useless as Aristella wrenched the soul stone out of his grip. Her eyes were dark as night, the skin around them angry but blue and purple. No! Tio shouted, trying to grab it back, but she leaned her weight harder onto her knees. Hot pain tore through Tio's shoulders. Instead of taking the stone and running for it, she held the soul stone out. Here, Aristella said, trying to hand it to her brother. Aristella stood rooted to the spot, shock and alarm written across her features. His eyes flicked at Tio, then back to Aristella. What are you doing? Tio tried to get up. Get off me! Shut up! Aristella snarled, her teeth bared. Take it, Aurelio! The color drained from Aurelio's face. He took a step back. I won't. Tio slumped with relief, but it was short-lived. Aristella jerked back as if he'd slapped her. For a moment, her flashed across her face before it was quickly consumed by rage. I told you he was manipulating you! She seethed. Black veins splintered out around her eyes. Tio balked. What are you talking about? Stella, stop this! Aurelio insisted, but she wouldn't listen. Aristella raised the soul stone over her head. Aurelio lunged. Terror squeezed Tio's chest as he threw his arms over his head and squeezed his eyes shut. Crash! Debris hit Tio's cheek. When he opened his eyes, he saw Aurelio had thrown out his arm in an attempt to shield Tio. Aristella had smashed the soul stone on the ground. Pieces of glass and shards of white that looked eerily like bones skittered across the floor. For a moment, no one moved. Tio stared up at Aristella, fear and anger freezing him in place. Her chest heaved as she sucked in a sharp, loud breath between clenched teeth, staring at what was left of the fake soul stone. It was more than shock on Aurelio's face. It was fear. Stella, he said quietly. He reached out and touched her shoulder. She flinched like she had forgotten he was there. Aristella blinked and shook her head, almost like she was clearing her vision, and everything suddenly came back into focus. The bruises faded and her eyes went back to smoldering brown. She looked at her brother and the shattered pieces, and then down at Tio, still pinned beneath her. Aristella reeled, quickly crawling off him. Tio took the opening and jumped to his feet. Suddenly, all three of their watches chimed at the same time. Tio's watch buzzed on his wrist. When he checked it, he saw the timer was counting down the last 5 minutes in angry red numbers. Time was almost up. Aristella leapt to her feet. Aurelio called after her, but she ran through the exit. Tio couldn't make heads or tails of what the hell had just happened. All he knew was his hands were shaking and his heart was pounding painfully in his chest. Aurelio's head swiveled back and forth between Tio and the door his sister disappeared through. He tried his watch again, right at the back of his throat. Come on, Aurelio said to Tio, waving him forward as he started to jog for the doorway. I know the way up. Hurry! There was no time to second guess. Tio ran for it. Aurelio let him get ahead, giving directions and shoving him in the right direction when he almost made a wrong turn. He guided them back out into the sunshine and both of them tore up the steps. When they reached the top, Tio was only vaguely aware that the Diosis and Diosaluna were already waiting. Nia stood next to the golden bowl, her stones piled in her arms. Where's Zio? She shouted, frantically looking for him behind Tio, but he wasn't there. I don't know! His watch shuddered, counting down the final seconds. Panic gripped Nia's voice. What do we do? Dump your stones! Aurelio shouted, like he couldn't believe they were stalling. Nia jerked, a bewildered look on her face as she stared at Aurelio before looking at Tio. There was no time to question it. They had to act now, or else it wouldn't be just Zio who got disqualified. Dump them! Tio told her. She hesitated for only a second, glancing once more back to the steps before she turned and dumped her stones into the bowl. As Tio ran forward, he pulled his bag off his chest, wrenching open the drawstrings. Aurelio shoved Tio's back, throwing him forward. His stomach rammed into the edge, and he upturned his obsidian stones into the bowl. Aurelio was right behind him. They tossed in their stones at the same time, gold and jade tumbling together. The last one slipped through the hole at the bottom. Just then, Zio appeared at the top of the steps, obsidian stones cradled against his chest. Run! Tio shouted. Hurry! Came Nia's frantic voice. Zio flung himself forward, but his foot caught in the last step. He crashed to his knees. A gasp caught in Tio's throat, dread spilling over him like icy water. 3 obsidian stones fell from his hands and clattered across the floor just as Mariachi's cornet sounded. Tio retreated. No! Tio, no! Tio retreated back to his mother's side as thunderous applause shook the arena. Are you okay? She asked. Quetzal swiped her thumb against his chin when she pulled back. His jade blood was on her skin. He nodded numbly, distracted as he watched Zio get swept into Mala Suerte's embrace. Nia paced back and forth in front of Tierra like a caged animal. As the rankings board was brought forward, Tio stole a look at Aurelio. There was a slight sheen of sweat on his brow. He was trying to smile for the cameras, but he kept glancing over at Aristella, who stood stick-straight and rigid, staring ahead and barely moving. The events of what had happened just minutes before pinged around in Tio's head. What the hell was that? Was Aristella really that ruthless? Her legs quaked as he watched her, paranoid she might go off on him again. Sol has determined the rankings, Diosa Luna announced. The glyph stood on the stone state. Tio tore his eyes away from the twins to the rankings. The crowd exploded with thunderous applause as people screamed for Tio. Jade banners waved in their chanting rows. Pajarito! Pajarito! Tio's mother squeezed his arm. You're third, Quetzal sang, her voice trilling. He couldn't believe it. Third? Tio repeated. The Jade Quetzal sat and stood among the gold glyphs bunched to the top. I'm third! Tio let out a booming laugh and buried his fingers in his hair. He couldn't believe it. Tio put in a deep, satisfied breath. He was almost there. He actually stood a chance of becoming Sunbearer. Aristella! Tio heard Otzi gasp. He searched for Lumbre's glyph with the A in the middle. He expected it to be somewhere near the top and was confused when he couldn't find it. His eyes trailed down, down, down until finally he spotted it. 8th. In one trial, Aristella dropped from 5th place to 8th. She stood next to her mother with her hands tightened to white-knuckle fists at her sides. Aristella remained still, but Tio could have sworn he could see her lips and chin trembling. Aurelia wasn't smiling anymore. And then there was Xochi, who had dropped all the way to the 9th. She stood huddled against her mother, her hands pressed over her mouth as tears sparked in her eyes. Every semi-diose looked upset, including Desi as he was led away for his interview. It made the roaring cheers of the crowd feel ominous and out of place. Tio searched for his friends. Nia's glyph hovered safely in 4th, but Tio's blood ran cold. The jade eye of Dios Mala Suerte had plummeted to last. Zio, he breathed, searching for him in the crowd. Zio stood next to Mala Suerte, leaning against his father's side. His nose was red, his eyes glassy as his father wrapped his arm around his small shoulders in a vice-like grip. What happened? Tio stammered. I tried to do what you guys told me to, Zio said, his voice tight, but I barely found any stones. Couldn't find you guys and I didn't know where the finish was. A wave of nausea rolled into Tio's stomach. They'd failed. There was no celebration amongst the semi-dioses this time. Reality hit them all in the stomach, swift and cold as iron. In the pursuit of becoming Sunbearer, Tio had forgotten his main goal, to keep his friends safe. Now Zio was in danger of being sacrificed. Back in the boat, Zio went right to his room and didn't come back out. Should we try talking to him? Tio asked. I don't know. When I'm upset, I usually need my own space, Nia reasoned, but she wasn't happy with her own answer either. Tio's guilt was eating him alive from the inside out. Nia's worry manifested as anger, and without somewhere to focus it, she ended up pacing back and forth in the common room. Even Aristella and Estella were silent, the former looking pale, but still desperately trying to manifest an air of superiority. Tio took a long, hot shower and stayed in his room through dinner. He wasn't hungry and couldn't face the other competitors. Instead, he lay in bed and obsessed over how they could have done things differently, rethinking every move the three of them had made during the trials that had led them to this point. If he hadn't gone back for the Soul Stone, maybe he and Nia would have been able to look for Zio. When he found the finish, maybe he could have gone back for Zio and gotten there on time. They should have shared their stones. If they hadn't been so concerned with winning, who knew what else he and Nia could have done to help him? Tio's stomach gave a second lurch. He remembered their first night in the temple, how he and Nia talked Zio into begging Diosa Pandolce for hot chocolate. How it felt seeing Zio, the small, resigned-looking kid, smile for the first time since arriving. Tio had thought he could help Zio and keep him safe, but clearly he was wrong. That wasn't how the trials worked. Tio curled up in bed and his wings hugged tightly around him. Aurelia had been right from the start. He didn't belong here. He didn't deserve this. Slow had seen something inside of him that simply didn't exist. The next morning after breakfast, the Soul Priest brought in new clothes for Tio to change into. This was the first time he was given a choice of what he wanted to wear. There were too many choices, if you asked Tio. Instead of a carefully laid out ensemble, a whole rack was waiting for him. All the pieces varied in style and color. It took Tio a while to pick out something he liked that went well together, but he finally decided on royal black slacks, a pastel green short-sleeved button-down, and a black sweater. When he met up with the others, Tio wasn't at all surprised to see that Aurelio and Aristella had coordinated in matching black and red outfits, somehow still looking like supermodels. Tio eyed Aristella, hating that he was actually genuinely afraid of her now. Desi had seemed to pull on every piece of blue, blush pink clothing he could find, and Aristella wore such a heinous mix of colors that Tio suspected they might be colorblind. You look cozy, Tio said to Zio with a grin. He was bundled up in jeans and a deep purple hoodie. I'm freezing, he grumbled, shivering on the deck. Here! Nia took off a long white cashmere scarf she'd been wearing and wrapped it snugly around Zio's neck several times until all that could be seen of him was his nose and eyes. Thanks, came Zio's muffled voice. How are you? Tio asked, trying hard to sound nonchalant. The last thing he wanted was to scare Zio off and make him feel even worse about being in last place. Zio shrugged, causing Nia's scarf to conceal even more of his face. Fine. Why? Tio looked at Nia for help. He pressed his brows together and gestured slightly to the younger boy. She shrugged in response, as if to say, What can you do? This time, there was no fancy tram to take them up to the city. Instead, they had to climb a very steep, very rickety set of wooden steps to a platform where 3 vans waited for them. Gross, Aristella sneered under her breath as they split up and got in. Opsion priests dressed in white and black checkered robes drove them into the city. It was a bumpy ride that reeked of exhaust, taking a gravel road from the dock to where the main streets were. When they curved around a bend, Labyrinto finally came into view. The peninsula sloped up toward the cliff face, putting the entire city on display. It was inarguably the strangest city Tio had ever seen. No 2 buildings were the same. Many were half-finished, while others started off in one style but continued to complete a different one. The residential areas were also eclectic, with no common theme between houses. They were brightly colored and stacked together tightly in what seemed like random streets until Tio realized, it's a maze! Indeed, the tightly packed streets crisscrossed and twisted around each other, several ending in dead ends. Nia let out a low whistle. I feel sorry for whoever's delivered the mail. The Opsion priest delivered them to Labyrinto's famous outdoor market, where the options never ran out. They were given an hour and a half for dinner to shop to their heart's content, at whatever shops or restaurants they liked. The outdoor market was arranged in a long, rectangular block of small buildings and stalls with finely paved walkways blocked off from the traffic of the city. The smell of sizzling meats from one of the many cart vendors spread throughout the market. Aristella immediately grabbed his salads in Aurelio's hands and ran off in the direction of a high-end clothing store. Oh yeah! Nia exclaimed. Shopping day! What if they have an athleisure store? Ooh, or a jeweler. They can get some new bracelets to make into weapons. Where do you want to go, Tio? Tio had his eyes set on a long fountain in the center of the strip. The ledge was flat and roughly bench height. I think I'm just going to hang out over there, actually. I'm not in much of a shopping mood. Me either, Zio agreed. Nia groaned. Come on, you should at least try to have some fun. But Tio shook his head. Seriously, Nia, you go ahead. We're beat from the trials, and it's not like there's anything here we need. Zio and I will chill by the fountain. You can come find us when we're done. When you're done. Ugh, fine, Nia agreed. But I'm totally looking for some new basketball shorts for you. Those ratty ones you wear to bed are embarrassing. What's embarrassing about my shorts? Tio demanded, but Nia was already walking away, waving him off dismissively. Tio sighed and started toward the fountain with Zio tagging along. Once they were seated, Tio decided to try to broach the subject of Zio standing in the trials one more time. He could understand Zio wanting to seem tough and unbothered, but the poor kid had to be scared. So, Tio began. Before he could say any more, Zio shook his head. I'm fine, Tio, the other boy insisted. Seriously, it's a miracle I lasted this long out of last place. We have one trial left, and all I can do is try my best. That's very healthy, Tio admitted. That's why he feels so bad. Can I join you guys? A voice asked from above. It was Marino, looking longingly toward the water behind them. Of course, Tio said, gesturing to the empty space beside him. Marino took his seat, a look of relief spread across his face. Thanks. Don't get me wrong, the market is cool and everything, but I'm just not in the mood, Zio offered. Marino nodded enthusiastically. How are you supposed to unwind with the pressure up this high? Seriously, Tio agreed. Across the walkway, he could see Estella and Aristella piling dresses and suits into the hands of a poor mortal shopkeeper. While they were busy, Tio saw Aurelio wander farther down the street on his own, his head swiveling back and forth like he was looking for something specific. Are y'all talking about the trials? Zoshi asked, approaching and taking a seat beside Marino. She leaned back so her head was tilted over the water, stretched her long legs, and crossed them at the ankle. I'm so sorry. I'm so over it all, you know? I just want to go home, Ozzy agreed, materializing beside her. But rather than sitting beside the other golds, Ozzy shuffled down the line to take the space next to Zio. Tio thought he noticed a flush of pink beneath Zio's massive scarf. Sochi snorted. I doubt the Academy will even give us leave to go home between the end of the trials and returning to school. For real? Tio asked. Even though you were all competing? Marino and Sochi shook their heads, frowning. We lose precious training time, Marino explained. I would kill for a week off, Sochi winced. Sorry, poor turn of phrase. Just meant I would do anything to spend some time with my mom in the gardens. To just float out on the open sea, Marino agreed. Not fighting a monster or rescuing civilians. Just for a little bit. An uneasy silence fell between them. Tio felt a strange surge of sympathy for all the gold students at the Academy. Sure, they were spoiled, selfish attention hogs. They were still people, no matter how much they wanted everyone else to think otherwise. Tio couldn't imagine not being allowed to go home when all this was over. A few minutes later, Nia emerged, dejected, from the athleisure store she'd found with Desi in tow. She plopped down right on the ground at Tio's feet, letting her head back to rest in his lap. "I shopped till I dropped," she declared and signed. Desi gave her a sympathetic pat on the hand. "You didn't even buy anything," Tio laughed. "I know!" she cried. "Isn't it pathetic? I can't bring myself to get into it. These stupid trials are really harshing my vibe." The other kids murmured in agreement. And so, for the rest of their allotted shopping time, they sat and thought about the impending final trial. Every few minutes, one of them would make a half-hearted attempt to distract the others from their thoughts, but in a conversation they tried to quickly spot it out. Nia was right. The vibes are way off. The remaining 3 competitors materialized back with their shopping from their shopping sprees. Aristella held a bag in each hand, full of clothes and accessories. Scylla had somehow managed to purchase an entire punching bag full of sand and was trying to fit it into the back of the car, much to the priest's annoyance. Meanwhile, Aurelio had only a small paper bag in the crook of his arm. "Aurelio," Aristella said, equal notes of concern and annoyance in her voice, "you didn't even buy anything." "I did," Aurelio said, digging his hand into the paper bag. "I didn't really know what anything was, so the shop owner picked everything out for me. He put out a handful of colorfully wrapped pieces of candy." "Candy?" Aristella said, giving her brother a confused look. Surprised laugh jumped into Tio's chest. Aurelio gave him a piece of marzipan along with a small, embarrassed smile. "Pulperinto chamoy?" Marina gasped, eyes going wide. "Bojeritos!" Ozzy sang. "Haven't had cocoa nugs in years," Xochitl added. "Can we have some?" Nia pleaded, clutching her hands to her chest. "I got more than I need," Aurelio said, holding the bag out. The others swarmed him immediately. "This is awesome! You're the best! Thanks, Aurelio!" Aurelio just nodded awkwardly, blushing. When Tio smiled at him, he was pleased to see his cheeks burn in an even darker shade of crimson. When the priest returned to escort them all to dinner, Aurelio continued to be the center of everyone's attention as they ate candy and cracked jokes. Tio enjoyed his piece of marzipan on the drive back, choosing to ignore Aristella, who kept shooting him a venomous glare. The drive to Opsion's temple took them to the city's winding streets. They passed the restaurant district, where eateries bordered a courtyard with picnic benches. There were several tables and chairs with board games set outside office buildings for public use. When they pulled up to the temple, Tio wasn't surprised to find it matched the chaotic nature of the rest of the city. The architecture was a hodgepodge of different styles. Some sections were plain stone, while other levels were brightly painted. Every window was a different shape, some with intricate moldings and others just boring squares. It looked like almost every resident of Labyrinto got to contribute to the design of the temple, and, judging by the scaffolding on the west side, it changed regularly. Option priests guided them through the seemingly endless rows of hallways until they were brought into the dining room. Diosa Option stood in the middle of the room. Her hair was cropped so shortly it was barely a shadow, and she wore a simple white dress. Her face was round, and while she looked very friendly, there was something about her expression that made it seem like she knew something you didn't and found it amusing. "Welcome, competitors!" She gave them a warm and friendly smile as they filed in. "Please, help yourselves and sit where you'd like," the diosa said, gesturing. Unlike the other cities where the tables had been long rectangles, this one was round. The smell of food immediately made Tio's mouth water. Instead of being served by priests, the food was laid out on long tables along the far wall. There was every food imaginable, but an especially large assortment of fish, which Tio figured had to do with them being so close to the ocean. When they had their food, Tio, Nia, and Zio picked a spot to sit. Diosa Opcion waited for everyone to settle before taking the empty chair next to Tio. When he turned to thank her for her hospitality, the diosa looked almost completely different. If it weren't for the fact that she was the only one well over 7 feet tall, you would have thought she was an entirely different person. In a blink, her hair had grown, now presenting as deep brown curls that hung below her suddenly cleft chin. Tio realized that when she moved, the rest of her color shifted, but couldn't decide what color it wanted to be. She gave Tio that same secretive look again as he gaped at her. "Whoa," Zio breathed, openly staring at her. "Thank you," Diosa Opcion replied with an amused grin. When she tucked a lock of hair behind her ear, it changed again, now long and straight and the color of sun-dried wheat. They ate as they quietly conversed, watching the diosa change as often as she chewed. "I'm surprised you're considered a jade," Zio said to her. "Why's that?" "You're just—" He blushed. "Very powerful." Ocello snorted. "You disagree?" Diosa Opcion said, studying them thoughtfully. Before their eyes, Ocello's hair shifted into its jaguar rosettes were pale, pink, and dark fuchsia. Desi gasped in delight, and Xochitl laughed. "What?" Sella demanded. Xochitl dug into her pocket and pulled out a compact mirror. "I think pink suits you," she said as she handed it to him. "You did this?" Sella said, somewhere between surprised and impressed, darting their eyes at the diosa, but that couldn't seem to look away from their own reflection. "Just a choice," Diosa Opcion said. "Simple choice for a single creature. As quick as it had changed, Stella's hair shifted back to normal. They snapped the mirror closed and tossed it back to Xochi, glaring at their plate. Choice is the most powerful force in existence. Much more powerful than me, the Diosa said casually, getting some shocked looks. Jades, golds, these descriptions mean nothing, really, Opsion said, dismissively waving her hand. We gave them to ourselves. It's humanity that has all the power. How can you say that? Araceli snapped, as if the Diosa had insulted her personally. So much like your mother, Diosa Opsion said, and Araceli sat up straight like someone had smacked her between the shoulder blades. You think humans serve us, don't you? No one said or did anything. It sounded like a trick question, but Tio didn't understand how. That was the way the world worked. Everyone knew that. We serve them, Opsion clarified. That's our power. It is a privilege they've granted us. Our people have free will, and our power would mean nothing without them believing in it. Without the gods, the world would end, Nia said, talking slowly like she thought the Diosa was confused. They keep us safe, just like Sol in their sacrifice, Marino added. Yeah, that's the whole reason we have the Sunbearer trials, isn't it? Ozzy said, unsure. To keep the Soulstone field. Everyone turned to Aurelio. He was usually so quiet whenever they ate together, but it was a bit startling to witness him speaking up. But he ignored the stares and kept his focus on Diosa Opsion, his expression stony and serious. Without them, the world would end. Yes, a single choice could end the world, Opsion agreed, and only one of you gets to make that choice. What does it say about the rest of your power? She smiled. But I suppose that's why you're all here, isn't it? She wasn't sure what to make of her knowing look. That was weird, Zio said as they walked back down the rickety steps to the dock. Yeah, it was like she was talking in riddles or something, Nia agreed, rubbing her temples. It gave me a headache. What the heck did she mean by any of that? I don't know, Tio said, and he was in deep thought. A single choice could end the world. Opsion had said it like some offhand comment, but it was fucking with his head. Something about it made him think of all the arguments he and Aurelio had gotten into, but what it meant to be the Sunbearer or the sacrifice. It was like the answer was right there, he just couldn't see it. Back on the boat, Tio, Zio, and Nia tried to be productive and do some last-minute brainstorming in the common room. Tomorrow they would return to Soul Temple and have one final day before the 5th trial, but they were entirely wiped out. Nia fell asleep first, her quiet snores becoming background noise while Tio listed off previous trials from Zio's thoughts, searching for a hint of what was to come. That was Zio's notes. After asking a question and getting no response, Tio looked up to find Zio slumped against Nia's side, fast asleep. We should go to bed, Tio whispered, plucking at Zio's sleeve. His eyes flew open and he sat upright. Now? Zio asked groggily, blinking his eyes to get them to focus. Already? It's almost morning, Tio told him. Can we stay up a little longer? The way he cast a furtive glance toward the cabins and the strain in Zio's voice gave Tio pause. Maybe he was just dreading the final trial, or simply didn't want to be alone. Either way, Tio didn't have the heart to tell him no. He sighed. Fine, a little while longer, but then we have to sleep. Zio nodded. Tio sat next to Zio and flew the TV on before turning the volume low. As Zio settled back against the cushions, Tio idly flicked through the channels. When Chesmay's annoying face came on screen, he changed it immediately to some nature documentary. Zio's deep, quiet breath mixed in with the droning voice of the narrator, letting Tio turn off his brain, if only for a while. Chapter 21. The trials were almost over. When the boat docked, they were back at Soul Temple, where this all had started and where, tomorrow night, it would all end. They had one more day. As a final celebration before the 5th trial, they would be having one last feast. All the competitors, their parents, and their priests were invited to eat, drink, and celebrate. It was supposed to be a huge deal, something the Golds kept talking about and were looking forward to, even under all the tension that hung in the air. But to Tio, it sounded awful. He didn't want to pretend that he was happy, or that this was an honor. He was tired and he was scared, and he felt entirely powerless to do anything about it. They disembarked and were led back to Soul Temple, and once again given the warning to stick to their quarters and not go wandering around. It felt like a year had passed since they left, not 9 days. The competitors went back to their old rooms and were told to make themselves presentable. Dinner would start at 6 o'clock sharp, and they needed to wear their regalia again, which was the last thing Tio wanted to do. When he walked into his room, his outfit was already waiting for him, hung on a clothing rack. Tio wanted to chuck the whole thing out the window. He was about to take a shower when someone knocked on his door. Tio raced to open it, hoping it would be Aurelio on the other side, but it wasn't. It was much worse. Hello, Tio, Verda greeted in her perpetually professional voice. Trismay winked from behind his sister's shoulder, wiggling his fingers in a small wave. Hi, Tio replied. He glanced on the hall, dread dropping into his stomach. Why the hell had these two showed up up to his room? Is something wrong? Am I in trouble? Not at all, Verda assured him. Trismay arched his eyebrows. Is there a reason you'd be in trouble? No, Tio said quickly. We were wondering if you'd be willing to sit with us for an interview, Verda explained. I love to hear from the Jade Semi-Dios who climbed up the ranks to third place. You're a great inspiration to your people. Or you would be if you talked to them, Chisme added. You have the audience to facilitate that. I guess, Tio said, though he still wasn't certain. He had such a grudge against Chisme, and he wasn't sure whether Verdad was just as untrustworthy. I have to go to that fancy dinner thing soon. We won't keep you long, Verdad rushed to add. Tio sighed. Yeah, okay, he finally agreed. They led him to one of the lower levels in the temple and into a large room that Verdad and his team had transformed into a control center. It was filled with desks and chairs, the room dark but illuminated by the blue lights of the huge wall of televisions. Reporters and editors sat at computers, splicing together clips of scenes from the trials while the news played in real time on other screens. Take a seat, Verdad said, leading him to what he assumed was her workspace. Desk had 3 monitors and huge stacks of paper meticulously organized next to an even row of pens. There was a second chair at the desk where a messy stack of tabloids and notebooks where Chisme sat. Tio pulled up a chair and sat down, tense and expecting cameras to be shoved in his face, but all Verdad did was pull out a yellow notepad. I'll start, she explained. Then my brother will have some questions for you too. For my piece, I'd like to give the people a more holistic view of the Jade demigod who has been dominating the trials, to humanize you a bit, if you'll pardon the pun. Verdad started the interview with some softballs, which was what it was like living in Quetzalcoatl, if he'd ever traveled through Reino del Sol before this, what his relationship with his mom was like, before diving into some probing questions. With a few taps of her keyboard, a still frame popped up on one of the monitors. It was from the very first trial. Cells stood at the top of the mountain, eyes cast in shadows as they glared, the boulder raised above their heads as Tio stared up at them, wide-eyed. You've been in quite a few precarious situations during the trials, Verdad said, studying him through her glasses, and without any of the training most of the other competitors have received. What's that like? Tio wasn't sure how she wanted him to answer. Well, it is the Sunbearer trials, he said, casting an uneasy glance at the still frame. Not exactly a walk in the park. He didn't know where she was going with this, but already he regretted agreeing to it. True, Verdad agreed, but this year, the competitors seem especially driven, let's say. Do they? Tio asked. Kid, Chisme cut in, these have been the juiciest trials since Pandolce's son confessed his love for Guerrero's daughter in the middle of the 5th trial. Verdad adjusted her glasses and cut her brother a look. Chisme raised his hands in surrender. Sorry. Go ahead. I can wait my turn. Verdad pulled a video of the 4th trial, distinctive for its verdant green plants and stone walls. She pressed play and Tio watched himself being knocked down, Aristella slamming on top of him and wrenching his wings back with her knees. Tio had been scared in the moment, but even now, in this quiet room with a solid chair beneath his legs, terror had crept up his spine. What happened here? Verdad asked. Aristella took me down, Tio said, shifting uneasily. Some people think if Aristella hadn't interfered, you would have been locked in for Sunbearer, Chisme said. Tio gave him an uncertain look. I doubt it. He might have ended up with the most points, but there was no way he was that close to being the Sunbearer. Verdad paused the video on Aristella, the soulstone raised up above her head. She was so angry her face was grotesque. The footage, clearly from a hidden camera, was a little blurry, but Tio could still make out the darkness of her eyes, could remember how they looked as she snarled down at him. When Verdad spoke, her voice was quiet as she studied his face, watching for his reaction. What was going through your head in this moment? Tio's palms were sweating. He wiped them on his thighs. I don't know. Do you think she was going to kill you? Chisme asked. Chisme, Verdad scolded. Please stop leading the responses. But Tio lifted himself at the bottom of the frame, his eyes squeezed shut and arms thrown over his head. Yes, he admitted, because it was true. For a second, I thought she might kill me. Chisme's mouth twisted into a terrifying grin, like a predator that had cornered its prey. Do you have a long-standing rivalry with Aristella? Tio snorted a laugh. Most of the Golds and I aren't friends. Killing you would be quite a leap, though, wouldn't it? He hesitated. Something prickled the back of his mind, a nagging feeling he hadn't been able to shake ever since the first trial. Yes, it would. But I'm sure it must be easy to get caught in the heat of the moment during the trials, Chisme reasoned, inspecting his nails. I can only speak for myself, I guess, Tio said, trying to focus. But yeah, I'm very, goal-oriented. But Tio's goal had always been straightforward, just to do as well as possible and look out for his friends. He stared at Aristella. In that moment, her goal had been to win, but to hurt Tio, to keep him from winning. That's worked very well for you, Verdad said, clearly trying to steer the interview back in her preferred direction. You've defied the odds over and over again during these trials. Tio frowned. I guess so. Truth be told, he had been so young during the last trials, he didn't really know what the standard behavior was for the competitors. He just assumed that, as Golds, they were all cutthroat and would do anything to become Sunbearer, till he met Nia, anyway. Verdad tapped around her keyboard and turned the monitor back to Tio, this time with the warm brown Lucumbre mountainside on the screen. He saw his own form gripping the rocks for dear life during the first trial, and saw looming over him, poised to throw a boulder down at the other competitors. The camera panned out to turn to capture Teal hovering in the air with his free wings shimmering in the sun, but he was distracted by a cell at the top of the cliff, bringing the boulder down and staring at it like they didn't recognize himself. Teal's mind flashed back to the jaguar jumping on a cello, the open, easy joy in the other's semi-Dios' face. That wasn't the same person at the top of the cliffs. Verdad asked another question, but he wasn't paying attention to her anymore. His mind raced as he searched the cliffs and still frames. The burning nest from the second trial. Nia and Aristella burst battling it out during the third. Such as thorny vines squeezing air at Marino. Teal had thought he just imagined it. It was so easy to overlook, but now he could see it, even in the shaking videos and blurred images. Each time someone had acted with particular violence, their eyes had gone the same glassy black. Some instances were fleeting, like Nia during the third trial, but others were more prominent, like the black vines he'd seen webbed around Aristella's eyes when she held the fake soulstone over his head. Something, or someone, was messing with the competitors. "Oh, I'm afraid we've kept you too long," he heard Verdad say. "The banquet has already started." Teal stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over his chair. "I have to go." "What about my turn?" Chesme asked. "I think you got quite enough," his sister replied dryly. As Teal stood to walk back toward the door, Verdad grabbed his forearm and squeezed. "Teal," she said, eyes steady as she stared up at him. "Good luck." Teal raced toward the banquet hall, fiercely tapping around videos after trials from Tutube, looking for better angles and moments that teased at his memory. Nia and Aristella fighting in the jungle at Opa Oasis, the viciousness between them. It wasn't normal. Something was wrong. Teal threw open the doors to the dining hall, skidding to a stop. The room was full, all the Dioses, competitors, and priests sitting at a large table with Luna at the head. Everyone turned to stare at him, including Aurelio. "Teal, where's your regalia?" his mother asked, confused as she looked at him up and down. At his side, Humek frowned, caught somewhere between confusion and the instinct to scold, but Teal couldn't care less about what he was wearing right now. "Is everything all right?" Luna asked, sitting from her chair. "All right? Was everything all right?" "Something's wrong with the trials," Teal shouted. Gasps and alarmed looks bounced around the table. Luna stared at him, bewildered. "What are you talking about?" Teal ran on the table, ignoring his mother's startled look and the others murmuring. "Look!" He held up his phone, quickly scrolling through videos and images from the trials. "Do you see their eyes? Something's been messing with people's minds during the trials, making them angry and violent, and I don't know," he stammered, trying to make sense of his jumbled thoughts. "Just look!" Teal thrust his phone toward Luna, but before she could move, Lumbre lurched to his feet. "Silence!" she demanded. Teal saw his mother's face oscillate between confusion and offense as she looked back and forth between the golds and her son. "Him being here is already making a mockery of the sacred tradition. This is yet another desperate play for attention." "Excuse me?" Teal snapped, what was perhaps not the wisest tone. Lumbre seethed. "I am not the first jade to compete in the trials, but this could be the first time the competition has been sabotaged." The final word elicited a gasp from somewhere down the table. "If you're supposed to be judged on our heroism and on how we act, but something else has power over us, doesn't that make the whole competition unfair?" "I have had enough of you and your dramatics." Lumbre knocked Teal's phone from his hand. It clattered to the floor, screen smashing as it skidded across the stone. Teal's heart thrashed. "No!" Ralia leapt to his feet. "Sit down!" Lumbre ordered her son, but he didn't move. His eyes darted between his mom and Teal, unsure of what to do. Aristella grabbed his arm from where she sat next to him. Teal took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions rising up in his belly. "Luna, please, listen to me. You of all people must have noticed that something isn't right." Luna swallowed, her hands restless before her. "It is not my place to question the will of soul." "So you have seen it!" Teal exclaimed. He looked around at his friends, waiting for their outrage to join his own. Nia, Zio, hell, even one of the Golds. But instead, they all looked just as confused and unsure as Luna. "Tio," Quetzal said gently, resting a hand on his shoulder. No one was listening. "Mom, this is serious! I can show you!" "The show is over, son of Quetzal," Lumbre snapped. "Take your seat and be grateful. To show up late for a banquet held on your honor as a competitor is enough of a disgrace. Do not embarrass your mother further." "Someone's going to get killed tomorrow!" Tio shouted back, his voice echoing off the walls. "And all you care about is that I'm late to this stupid dinner?" The room was silent. No one had said it plainly like that, the whole length of the trials. Everyone had quietly agreed to ignore half of what they saw leading to. "How do the rankings work, Luna? How is the Great Soul deciding who will be killed tomorrow? Are any of us safe?" Luna only gazed at him, apparently aware that he didn't expect an answer from her. "All this time, the rankings have been weird. We all know it." Teal's heart was racing. He couldn't keep track of the words tumbling from his own mouth. It wasn't just about what Verdad had shown him anymore. It was like all the anger and frustration he felt during the trials was finally coming to a breaking point. "Your daughter could be killed tomorrow, Dios Lumbre. Don't you care about that?" he shot back. Fire blazed in her molten eyes. "How dare you! Stop it, Tio!" a voice suddenly said at his side. Zio sat at the table next to his father, his face pale. "Zio," Tio said, shocked. Didn't he care? Didn't he care? He was ranked last. Tears shone in his dark eyes. You're making things worse, he said in a strangled voice. Malasuerte protectively wrapped his arm around his son's small shoulders. You know what this was when you came home, Luna said, slowly and deliberately. I didn't choose to be a competitor, Tio argued, but he could hear the defeat in his own voice. This runs our world, Tio, she said calmly. You know that. You just didn't care when it didn't affect you. Excuse me? Tio took a step back, the words like a punch to his gut. He looked around. Nia, for once at a loss for words, stared at him, confusion puckering her brow. The other competitors exchanged weary glances while priests whispered to one another behind their hands. Revelio was still on his feet, ready to do something, but even he looked at a loss. But the eyes... He looked where his phone lay broken and useless on the floor. Tio... His mom stood up and gingerly took a few steps closer to him. I think you're very tired, she said, softly and slowly like she was talking to a frightened bird. You've been through a lot. Maybe you need some rest. Tio's heart sank. Even his mom didn't believe him. This is a disgrace, Lumbre roared. I want him punished. It's the night before the final trial, Diosa Lumbre, Luna said calmly. That hung heavy in the air. Well, it could be worse than what they have to go through tomorrow. Then I want him confined to his room. Lumbre slammed her fist on the table. Luna sighed but didn't argue. Tio, please go to your room and cool off, she said, waving him off before rubbing her brow. Tomorrow's the 5th and final trial. I like to get to go better than tonight. Humiliated and angry, Tio stormed back to his room before anyone could try talking to him. Once again, he slammed the door behind him. Why didn't no one believe him? He knew it was far-fetched, but the evidence was there, wasn't it? That was sour in Tio's stomach. He could have sworn he could see it, whatever it was, in people's eyes from the footage. His mom was right. He was exhausted, but that didn't mean he'd made it all up. Had that just been a trick of the light? Tio squeezed his eyes shut and rubbed them with his fists. What was happening to him? Someone knocked on the door and Tio jumped. Dread sank into his stomach. Was it Lumbre, back to chew him out? Or maybe Luna, coming to give him another punishment? He was tempted to just ignore it. When they knocked again, this time more persistent, Tio dragged himself to the door and opened it. It was Humac. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Tio braced himself, waiting for the priest to scold him or chew him out for his behavior at the banquet. Instead, Humac sighed. Troublemaker, he said softly. Tears immediately filled Tio's eyes, and when he tried to blink them away, it only got worse. Humac stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. What a mess you've gotten yourself in, Troublemaker, he said with a tired smile. Tio all but collapsed into the old man's arms, his tears spreading dark across Humac's emerald green robes in a way that they hadn't since he was a little kid. Humac held him tight and rubbed the soft ridges between his wings. Tio hadn't felt like that comforting touch in years. Your wings are so handsome, Humac said, voice gruff even after clearing his throat. I've been wanting to tell you. I'm so proud of you. Tio let out a bitter laugh. Why? I've done a single thing for you to be proud of. Why? Humac pushed him back with warm hands on his shoulders and made him stand up straight. Tio, you have become so completely yourself. I am in awe of the young man before me. Tio shook his head. I shouldn't even be here. You didn't exactly have a choice. Tio thought back to what Dioso Opsion had said. We all have a choice. I'm just a fuck-up, Tio said, rubbing at his eyes. I fuck everything up. Oh, Tio, Humac sighed. He sat on the edge of the bed and motioned for Tio to join him. I have called you Troublemaker since you were 2 months old, he said. I never told you this story, but I was holding you while your mother gave a speech. You had just gotten fed and you wouldn't burp. He shook his head disapprovingly, but an amused grin curled his mouth. Finally, I had to give you back to the Diosa before she went back to the podium, and as she took you, you puked right down the front of her dress. And you laughed at me. I swear you did. Humac chuckled. That was the first time I called you that. Not sure what baby barf has to do with this, Tio said weakly. And it didn't matter, Tio, Humac continued, ignoring him. Your mother laughed too. She had many, many photos taken with spit up on her after that. You taught me it didn't matter. You've never respected authority or formality, from the very beginning. Humac fixed Tio with a serious look. But you don't cause trouble for the sake of hurting others. When you see things that are unjust, when you see people who are acting unjustly, you cause trouble by interrupting them. That's not why You are a loud, impulsive, persistent seeker of justice, Humac cut in, not letting him finish. And that makes people uncomfortable. But it doesn't make you bad. It makes you very good, in fact. Far better than the rest of us who stay quiet because they're afraid to speak up. I think this is the nicest thing you've ever said to me, Tio teased through sniffles. You do well to remember it. A surprised laugh bucked in Tio's chest, releasing some of the tension knotted in his body. I think I made a fool of myself, Tio confessed. But Humac shook his head. No, Tio, you spoke up because you had to. It's not your fault the Golds don't listen. It wasn't just the Golds. Tio recalled the sinking feeling in his gut when he realized Quetzal didn't believe him either. Humac sighed. I am only mortal, Tio. I understand what it's like to feel that my actions are inconsequential. But we must try to do what is right, regardless of who is willing to listen. They sat in silence for a moment before Tio said quietly, I'm scared. Humac smiled and patted his knee. You have to be an idiot not to be. Troublemakers may change, Tio. You are your mother's son. You're the hero of Quetzalcoatl, whether you want it or not, he added when Tio made a face. That's a lot of responsibility. A responsibility Tio still didn't think he'd earned, but he could start to. I ruined that stupid fancy dinner and people think I'm making up stories about the trial. Oh god. Sorry for the loud sound. He said, rubbing his nose. Everyone hates me now. If your friends know you, they know you're a very good person with good intentions. If they still hate me? Nia knows you're Tio. Don't sell her short, Humac said. It would have been much easier for her not to be your friend all these years, you know. She won't give you up so easily. When Tio still didn't look convinced, he added, if all else fails, buy her forgiveness with all the candy you've got stuffed in your bag. Tio gave him a wry smile. You knew about that, huh? Humac chuckled and clapped Tio on the back. Someone's the only all-seeing one.